My sister ruined my life by helping my ex-wife force me to pay child support for a child that isn't mine, while hiding her own affair. I'll start by saying that I truly despise my sister, albeit this wasn't always the case. She is my older sister, and as we grew up I admired her greatly. However, she has shown me throughout time that she can be a dreadful sister. My ex-wife Susie and I had been married for 2 years before I found she was cheating on me. The information came as a complete shock. I recall the moment well. I was browsing through her messages when I came across a chat in which she confessed to sexting with her male best friend for 8 years. Susie had always told me that he was merely a friend who had been in her life forever. Despite occasional envy, I had a great faith in her. We had established our relationship on trust, so when I unintentionally discovered the explicit text exchanges between them, I was completely taken aback. It felt as if the basis of all I thought in our marriage had crumbled in an instant. When I challenged her, she broke down and apologized profusely. She argued that it was only a one-time mistake and that her friend meant nothing to her in that sense. She vowed to block him and assure me that it would never happen again. Despite my rage and pain, I wanted to trust her. We began going to marriage counseling because I was terribly hurt by her betrayal and needed to understand why it happened and whether our marriage could be saved. Susie appeared to be truly sorry throughout counseling. She accepted responsibility for her misdeeds and worked diligently to recover my trust. For a time, it seemed like we were making significant progress. She was attentive, open, and willing to work to repair our connection. I decided to stay and give our marriage another opportunity because I still loved her and wanted to believe that people could change and relationships could be repaired. However, as you may have predicted, it was a huge error. After a while, I discovered that my ex-wife was attempting to meet up discreetly with her male closest friend. She had told me earlier that evening that she was going out with a coworker, but something about her demeanor looked off, and I had a nagging suspicion she was lying. I trusted my instincts and called the coworker after Susie departed to check in. To my dismay, they informed me that they had no plans with Susie. I felt a wave of sadness and confusion rush over me. It was becoming brutally evident that Susie was meeting up with this guy. Otherwise, she had no reason to deceive me. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal as I attempted to call her several times, but she disregarded each call. As the night progressed, I felt an increasing sense of dread and helplessness. She arrived home pretty late and utterly inebriated. I'd been waiting for her all evening, sitting on the couch in our living room, my head whirling with emotions. When she stepped through the door, she didn't acknowledge me. Instead, she stumbled past me on her way to the bedroom, as if I didn't exist. I sat there feeling invisible and completely saddened, understanding that the woman I once trusted and loved had become a stranger to me. Later, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard her phone beep on the bedside table, indicating a message notification. Susie had fallen asleep wearing her evening clothes, evidently too inebriated to change. I carefully covered her with a blanket and, filled with dread and curiosity, leaned over to see what message she had gotten. I knew the number right away. It belonged to him, her male acquaintance. My heart fell as I read the words. That was so much fun. We should do this more frequently. The message ended with a tongue and a sweat drop emoji, which made matters worse. I felt a rush of sickness come over me. There was no way a guy would send a message with those emojis unless something big had occurred between them. My mind raced with frightening thoughts of what they may have done. I felt ill to my stomach as I realized that my worst worries were probably true. I attempted to relax myself, but it was impossible. The betrayal felt like a real agony in my chest, and I couldn't get rid of the thought of them together. I couldn't get any sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind filled with fear and grief. I kept repeating everything in my thoughts, wondering how it had gotten to this point and what I should do now. The night seemed long, and by the time daylight arrived, I knew nothing would ever be the same. When I confronted Susie about that night and how she had lied, she tried everything she could to avoid accepting responsibility. Initially, she attempted to manipulate and gaslight me, stating that my lack of trust was the real issue and that calling her coworker was a violation of her privacy. She accused me of being neurotic and unreasonable. Her attempts to gaslight me were difficult and unpleasant, but I refused to give in. I brought up the message he sent and demanded an explanation. She dismissed it, claiming that's just how friends talk to each other, and dubbed me crazy for reading too much into it. Her dismissive tone simply strengthened my drive to discover the truth. I chose to play my final card. I told her that if she didn't come clean, I'd approach him directly. This warning seemed to hit a chord. She became visibly uncomfortable and attempted to persuade me not to contact him, evidently concerned about the repercussions. Susie eventually broke down and confessed, despite her initial resistance and reluctance. She stated that she had wanted to meet him for a long time and that they did make out after becoming intoxicated. Her statement was like a blow in the gut, confirming my worst concerns and breaking any remaining faith in her. She proceeded to defend her behavior, claiming that our marriage had grown dull and she was looking for excitement elsewhere. I firmly objected, pointing out that her adultery and deception were the very reasons our marriage had deteriorated. I reminded her that it was hard to go back to normal after realizing she was sexting with another man. Despite her attempts to excuse her behavior, I held firm. I made it plain that she was solely responsible for breaking our vows and shattering the trust we had built. I voiced my severe displeasure and informed her that I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't just ignore her acts and pretend everything was fine. Susie, recognizing the enormity of the situation, started appealing for pardon. She admitted her issues but begged me not to abandon her, emphasizing her willingness to work on herself and our relationship. Despite her vows, I realized that our trust had been irreparably shattered. The damage was too severe now, and I realized that continuing would just prolong the inevitable. Her infidelity had left a chasm that we couldn't mend, and our marriage was irreparably destroyed. After learning this, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life: ask her to leave my house. Fortunately, we had a prenuptial agreement in place, so I was relieved that it would safeguard me from any potential financial consequences of our divorce. Despite her desperation and attempts to enlist her friends to encourage me to forgive her, I stayed firm in my decision and eventually booted her out onto the streets. I know this may seem harsh to read, but I was in too much suffering. I had always imagined that we would grow old together, but her betrayal left me devastated, and I knew I would never be the same again. I told my parents and older sister, Na, about what had happened between me and Susie. They were astonished and disturbed by the news, as no one had expected Susie's behavior. They informed me of their support for divorcing her, which gave me some consolation. Here is the punctuated paragraph, logically divided into pieces. However, Na appeared abnormally silent throughout this, which struck me as peculiar. When I asked for her thoughts, given her strong friendship with Susie during our marriage, she answered unexpectedly. Instead of embracing my emotions of betrayal as a result of Susie's behavior, Na questioned if I was definite about divorcing her, pointing out that, unlike me, Susie had family support. Na's remark surprised me since it appeared like she was more concerned about Susie's well-being than the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. I answered sternly to Na, indicating that I didn't care about Susie's support system because she had decided to betray me multiple times through infidelity. I made it clear that Susie's well-being was no longer my concern, and I wondered why she seemed more concerned about my ex-wife than about me, her own brother. Na justified herself, stating that she was only concerned about me and did not want me to make rash decisions concerning my marriage. She stated that she had always believed Susie and I were meant for each other and that she was still shocked by our divorce. As a result, she inquired as to whether I will have any regrets in the future. While I found her remark weird at the time, I didn't think about it too much later. The entire situation was already emotionally draining, so I concentrated on getting through my divorce first. Initially, everything appeared to be going well for me during the divorce proceedings, and my lawyer was certain that we would win. But suddenly everything changed. Susie announced a bombshell: she was pregnant. This discovery really caught me off guard. I had not expected it at all. Clearly, life had other plans for me and intended to hurt me even more. Susie and her lawyer asked me to put the divorce procedures on hold after hearing this news. They stated that we should strive to resolve matters for the sake of our child. Susie insisted on providing our child with a conventional family upbringing. I was taken aback and instantly responded, declaring that I no longer cared about her wishes and that this child could not be mine. Susie responded by arguing that she had never been intimate with anybody other than me. She highlighted that just because she had a sexual encounter with her male closest friend that night did not mean she could become pregnant from him. She continued to encourage me to think about what was best for our child and to fight for our marriage for the sake of the baby. But I refused to be influenced. I realized this was a desperate attempt to derail the divorce process and guilt-trip me into staying with her so she could continue to live a luxury lifestyle on my money. Susie was clearly grabbing at straws, but I stayed firm in my determination to leave the marriage. I remained steadfast, arguing that the divorce will continue as planned. I stated that when Susie gave birth, I would schedule a paternity test to determine whether the child was mine or not. However, Susie's lawyer refuted our case, arguing that because Susie was still legally married to me and had declared that she had not been intimate with anyone else, I was automatically the father of the kid. They stated that they would seek child support from me as a result of this. My lawyer vehemently disagreed, arguing that such allegations were baseless without a paternity test. Unfortunately, we were all too aware of the flaws in our judicial system, particularly when it came to defending men in cases like this. Susie's lawyer later sued me for child support, offering proof to back up their allegation that Susie had not been intimate with anyone else. They presented me as a controlling freak who attempted to avoid paying child support and accepting responsibility for my acts. They even called in witnesses to testify on Susie's behalf. My older sister, Na, was among the witnesses, which shocked me. I had no idea she would even be present. Initially, I figured she was there to observe and support me, but to my surprise, she testified against me, claiming that she had been friends with Susie for a long time and was confident that Susie could not have betrayed me by sleeping with someone else. My sister said Susie was still in love with me. Na claimed unequivocally that she believed the child belonged to me. Hearing my sister back my ex-wife over me was terrible. Na knew how much I loved Susie and how much she had wounded me, yet she was there to defend her deceptive behavior. Later, once we were out of court, I confronted my sister about her surprise testimony. I voiced my amazement and betrayal, feeling absolutely taken aback by her behavior. Na, on the other hand, stayed firm in her choice, saying that she was doing the right thing and that I would come to respect her stance in the future. I raised my voice, expressing my contempt and outrage at her for placing me in a position where I would have to pay child support for a child whose paternity had not yet been established. Na argued that I shouldn't be so harsh to an unborn child and that I should consider Susie's financial hardships if I didn't pay her alimony or child support. She told me that I would never comprehend her point of view since I did not have parental instincts like women. She persuaded me to see that covering the child's fees was the least I could do in this scenario. My sister's point of view left me feeling exploited and very uneasy. I couldn't understand how she could prioritize Susie's money demands over my emotional pain. My parents were also disappointed at my sister, telling Na that she had no right to testify against me. However, the harm was already done. My own sister testifying against me demonstrated to the court that Susie could be telling the truth and that I was attempting to avoid responsibility for our child. As a result, the court found in favor of my ex-wife, awarding her child support from me until the child turned 18. I was enraged and refused to accept the sentence, but despite our best efforts, my lawyer and I were unable to persuade the court. My divorce from Susie has been final for quite some time, and I have continued to pay child support for her kid on a monthly basis. Despite the fact that a paternity test proves that the child is not mine, he bears no resemblance to me. The truth is that because my ex-wife became pregnant while we were still married, the child is legally my responsibility. I'm now required to continue paying until he reaches the age of 18. This is why during this journey, my animosity toward my sister has grown stronger than it has toward my ex-wife. I totally blame Na for putting me in this situation. This is why, despite my parents' repeated requests to forgive her and move on, I have kept utter silence toward my sister and refused to acknowledge her presence at family functions. Everyone in the family appreciates and understands my position. Several cousins and relatives share my hate for Na, so they keep their distance from her. Na has repeatedly complained to our parents about how I have isolated her from the rest of the family. She defends her conduct by claiming that she did what she believed was best for the child. However, her attempts to elicit compassion have continued to fall on deaf ears, as the rest of the family realizes her folly and supports my decision. Nina married her longtime lover Joshua last year. Despite receiving an invitation to the wedding, I declined to go. My parents then told me that many other family members did not attend, which disappointed Na. She and her spouse spent some time after their marriage attempting to conceive. My parents had expressed to me their joy at the idea of finally having a grandchild from our family. I recently had to travel to a nearby town for a work conference organized by my company. Following the conference, my co-workers and I decided to unwind and relax at the hotel bar in our leisure time. Imagine my astonishment when I noticed my sister sitting with an elderly gentleman at the pub. She hadn't noticed me, and I kept it that way since I was curious about her appearance in a late-night club out of town, especially since she was married. I watched as she came in closer to the elderly man and murmured something into his ear that made him giggle. My suspicions intensified as they appeared to be flirting and acting unusually comfortable with each other. Without thinking about it, I reflexively reached for my phone and silently took a few photos. I took care to get clear images of my sister's and the older gentleman's faces, as I wanted incontrovertible confirmation of what I was seeing. As I saw them together at the bar, my mind raced with amazement and confusion. How could my married sister find herself in such a compromising situation? I watched in surprise as Na and the man continued their intimate talk, exchanging grins and laughter. After approximately an hour, the man motioned for Na to follow him to his room. She nodded and stood up to join him. My eyes widened as the truth of the scenario dawned on me and I realized I was seeing my sister prepare to cheat on her husband. I wanted to yell at her to stop, but from previous experience, I knew that cheats never learn from their mistakes. Instead, they must be given a lesson. After returning home, I decided to contact her husband, Joshua, personally. I believed it was necessary for him to know the truth rather than being caught off guard like I was. I located him on Facebook and made him a friend request, hoping he'd accept. After a few hours, I checked and discovered that he had accepted my request, so I instantly messaged him. In the message, I introduced myself as Nina's brother and stated that we needed to have an important chat. I requested him not to tell my sister about my text to him and gave him my phone number so he could contact me. I hoped he'd listen to what I had to say and waited impatiently for his call. A few minutes later, he called to ask why I had contacted him. He stated that he was already aware of me through Na and my parents, but was astonished that I had contacted him after all this time. I apologized to him for missing their wedding and expressed my concern that we were speaking under such circumstances. He then inquired what was wrong, and I honestly described what I had witnessed in the hotel between Noah and the older gentleman. I hesitated from immediately using the word cheating, because I wasn't sure if Na and he had an open marriage or not, and I didn't want to make assumptions. However, as I recounted the events to Joshua, he began probing with various questions regarding Na's attire and who the other man was, indicating obvious discomfort. However, as I recounted the events to Joshua, he began probing with various questions regarding Na's attire and who the other man was, indicating obvious discomfort. To back up my story, I said that I had taken photographs of her with the gentleman, as I found it difficult to believe myself. I immediately shared those photographs with him to provide actual proof of what I had experienced. He was clearly moved by the revelation of Nina's infidelity and was wrestling with the seriousness of the situation. After a lengthy pause, he suddenly expressed gratitude for my candor and asked why I would go out of my way to assist him, given that we were virtually strangers and I no longer had a relationship with Na. His query struck a chord, prompting me to share my own experience, explaining how I had been in his shoes when my ex-wife cheated on me. As I probed more into the circumstances, I explained how Na had exacerbated my agony by testifying against me, resulting in my current burden of paying child support for a child who was not even mine. Joshua remained quiet for a few minutes after hearing my story. He then revealed that Na told him an entirely different version of the truth. Susie and my marriage, she claimed, were already faltering. And we had ceased being affectionate, prompting Susie to make a one-time error that allegedly led to our split. I was furious after hearing this distortion of truth, and I explained to Joshua that Susie had cheated on me twice, demonstrating that our divorce was not the result of a single error, but of her continually breaking my trust with her male buddy. To my relief, Joshua believed me and appreciated my candor in exposing my sister's dishonest actions. He informed me that he had no intention of staying with a cheating partner and planned to discuss this with Nina. In the days that followed, my parents regularly called to accuse me of wrecking Nina's life, since she was going through a divorce. They accused me of intruding unduly in her marriage and voiced disappointment at not being able to have a grandchild from her. Following this, I did not hold back in the dispute. I refuted their claims by explaining that it was not my responsibility that their daughter was unfaithful in her marriage. I suggested that instead of focusing on the prospect of having a grandchild, they should concentrate on teaching my sister better values and morals so she might become a better person. Na also sent me a derogatory text, accusing me of being a bitter young boy who couldn't keep his nose out of other people's business. She even said that Susie's infidelity during my marriage was legitimate, and that I deserved everything that had occurred to me. Her message enraged me, and it took me several hours to calm down after reading it. However, fate appeared to have its own way of balancing things, as I recently discovered that Na is presumably pregnant. She claims Joshua is the father, but he refuses to accept any responsibility. Joshua has contacted me, requesting that I testify for him when the case eventually goes to court, as I was the one who took those incriminating photos of Na and the other man. I accepted without hesitation. Not only to exact revenge on my sister, but also out of sympathy for Joshua. I do not want another man to go through the anguish and betrayal that I did with my ex-wife. Since then, my parents and Nina have persistently pressed me not to testify for Joshua. They continue to emphasize that family comes first. I can't help but find their sentiments amusing, especially since Na didn't emphasize family when it came to me. I am determined to teach my sister a lesson and guarantee that her husband does not meet the same fate as I did. Update 1. I'm shocked at how polarized everyone's reactions to my post are. I can't believe a few women are attempting to persuade me to support my sister, even though she has blatantly cheated. I say, shame on you. Believe me, I would have had no issues if my ex-wife had requested child support after demonstrating that the child was mine. But she didn't. She knew the child wasn't mine because we weren't even intimate at the time. As a result, she willfully forced me to accept responsibility for it because she couldn't pay it on her own. I couldn't show that she had intimate connections with that other guy because there was no evidence other than the text I discovered. As a result, I despise my sister Na for deceiving me and testifying for my ex-wife. However, now that Na is also manipulating her husband, I will not stand for it. I will testify against her and ensure that Joshua does not suffer the same fate. If it is discovered after the child is born that Joshua is the father, I am confident that he will step forward because he appears to be a lovely guy. But, until that is confirmed, why should a husband be required to pay child support when his wife has clearly been sleeping with other men? Na has expressed no guilt for her infidelity or for being the cause of her marriage's dissolution. Unlike my marriage, Joshua and Nina do not have a prenuptial agreement, which means he may be required to pay her alimony. On top of that, I feel he should not be required to pay child support for a child who is not his. I believe I'm doing the right thing, and I'm pleased that the majority of the comments support my decision. Update 2. It's been a long time since I posted anything here. Today, I testified against my sister in court. I described what I had seen her do with the older man, showing all of the proof and images. I could feel my sister's angry stare on me the entire time, but I remained determined. Despite her lawyer's attempts to discredit my testimony by suggesting I harbored a grudge against my sister, the judge accepted its credibility. I hope my testimony has a favorable impact on Joshua's case and that he is not required to pay child support, but the conclusion remains to be seen. In the midst of it all, my relationship with my parents has deteriorated. My mother called me, her voice strangled with tears, after learning that I had followed through on my pledge to testify against my sister. She was plainly disappointed, telling me that she and my father hoped I wouldn't do such a thing to my sister. As I listened, I couldn't help but become frustrated. I reminded her that they had never battled for me so hard when my sister had done the same thing to me during my divorce, and that they had even forgiven her for everything. Yet here she was calling me a letdown and wailing as if my troubles and pains were insignificant in comparison to my sister's. I informed my mother that it was unfair for them to chastise me for standing up for what was right and expressing the truth, especially because they had previously failed to support me. It seemed like a betrayal, and I made it obvious that I did not need them or my father in my life if they were going to favor my unfaithful sister over me. Since then, I've stopped talking to my parents and refused to answer their calls or respond to their messages. Update 3, I am returning with an update on my sister's predicament. I'm happy to say that Joshua has been exonerated of paying child support to my sister. I'm sure Na is upset. I can't help but feel relieved knowing that at least one person was spared the unjust weight that so many others, including myself, have had to bear. To clarify a few more points. No, I don't have a relationship with Susie's son. Even though I still pay child support. If the son grows up and contacts me, I will not hesitate to tell him the truth about his mother. Yes, my parents and I are still not communicating. And to be honest, I have felt much lighter and more comfortable since they stopped contacting me every other day and blaming me for not supporting my sister. Nah, she won't dare confront me since I'm sure she's still embarrassed that I testified against her. Also, yes, she will receive alimony from Joshua as we expected. No, my parents do not have a relationship with Susie's son because they know he is not my child. I'm not sure if they'll accept Nina's child, but maybe they will. That is all.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.